Good morning, students. Today we'll be doing a revision of your first chapter in SST, the story of past and evidences in history. If you just follow this, the mind map over here, like you can see, first we are talking about history. What do we understand about history? The meaning of history and father of history. The meaning of history simply means it is a recorded account of events, people, and places from the past in a chronological order. This is actually how we define history. What is history? It's a recorded account of events. That means we have written proof of the events, people, and places from the past, and it is all in a chronological order, date wise series is there. So that is history. When we are talking about history, this is the study of that period of our past for which we have written records, right? Then, who is considered as father of history? Herodotus, a Greek historian of the 5th century. He is referred as father of history. What is he famous for? He is famous for his book, The Histories. Right? You need to remember the name, The Histories. This is the book that he wrote. And Herodotus is also famous because he was the first historian who collected all his material and arranged it in a series, in a chronological order. So that's why he is considered as father of history. Next we come to division of history into 3 parts. But before this, we just go through the pages of our history book as well. The need of history. Before division, we just refer to the need of history. Why do we need history? History helps us to learn about our past. History helps us to know our own culture. History helps us to know other people's culture. Then you can say that history gives us the data about various happenings in the past. It tells us about the great kings, great personalities, great people, leaders of the past who are actually a source of inspiration for us even today. For example, people like Mahatma Gandhi, people like Abdul Kalam, all these people, they inspire us today also, even though they are not there physically, they are not present, but still, if we have to know something about them, we refer to our history books and we are inspired by them. Right? Next, we come to this division of history into 3 parts. What was the need for division? History is so vast, students, that there is actually a need to divide it in parts. This part is called as historical period, and each period spreads over many years. So Indian history has been divided into ancient period, medieval period, modern period. Ancient period means it starts from the beginning to the 7th century AD with the death of King Harshvardhan. That is considered as ancient period. Medieval period from 700 AD to 1750. And you can say, students, that in case of medieval period in the Indian history, this was very important because this was actually the time of the establishment of the Mughal Empire in India. Then the third one, the modern period. Modern period is also considered as very important period because you can say that this started with in the beginning of the 18th century with the coming of Britishers. So these are the 3 periods in which the Indian history has been divided. Okay. Then we move on to sources of history. If we really have to know about the sources, then where do we look? Now I think it's clear. Right. So there are 2 sources of history, the archaeological source and the literary source. Archaeological source, very easy to understand. This is the non-written source that we can depend on. Literary source, as the name suggests, is the written source of history. Now we try and understand what is archaeological source. Archaeological source would be the monuments, the inscriptions and the coins. All these are the sources which is considered as archaeological source. What exactly do we understand by archaeology, students? Archaeology actually means digging up the past, right? The archaeologists, they dig up the historical places. They excavate these places, and they try and look for clues, and they find them, and they study them and try and reconstruct an image as to how the people of that particular civilization must have lived. Now, these archaeological sources would include the monuments, the inscriptions, the coins, the fossils, jewelries, artifacts, and all these things. So, during excavation, suppose they find the coins, then what do they discover? If they find coins, then you can say that coins give us an important information about kings, because the coins, it could be silver, copper, gold, or any other metal, and it has inscriptions, the names of the kings, the dates of the dynasties and all mentioned in the coin. So the archaeologists are able to find out about the economic condition in that particular period, in that particular era, the way people must have lived their life, the standard of living of that age. So all these things can be found through these coins. Then we find inscriptions. These are the writings engraved on hard surfaces like pillars, cave walls, stone walls, walls of temples, monuments, and all. And you have copper or clay tablets also, where the inscriptions are written. During the Buddhist time, students, a lot of these inscriptions were found on the pillars and all. So, if the archaeologists are able to discover all these things, then you can say that they are able to find out about the culture which was prevalent in those times. Then we have the monuments as well. In case of monuments, monuments are the forts and places and temples built by the rulers of those period. So they actually tell us about the life and culture which existed in that particular era. So all these, you can say, students, these are all the archaeological sources. These are the non-written sources which tells us about the history of that particular time. Next we come to the literary sources. Literary, as the name suggests, these are the written sources, right? This is divided into religious literature, traveler's account, and secular literature. Now, religious literature, as the name suggests, it includes the religious text of various religions, like the text of the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Muslims, and the other communities as well. We can take two examples, like you must be familiar with Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Gita. These are all the religious texts. So they actually tell us about the society, the religious practices, the traditions that used to exist in those times. So if we read these religious literature, then we can actually understand the society in those times when it was written. Then we have the traveler's accounts. Traveler's account mean the travelers who traveled to India during those times. They gave a very vivid, a very clear description of India of that particular time. Let's say we take the example of Megasthenes or Fahian or Al-Biruni. These are examples of foreign travelers who gave very clear description of India at the time when they visited India. So if we really have to know about that particular period, then we can fall back on these travelers' account. Then we will understand the kind of society India was, the kind of people who used to live in that society, etc. Right? Then we have the secular literature. Now, secular literature means the historical literature which include text of non-religious nature. That means it could be the biographies, the autobiographies, plays, poems, memoirs, writings on politics, medicines, etc. So these does not relate to the religious nature. Okay, an example which is given in your book is Harish Charita. This is a biography of King Harshvardhan by Ban Bhatt. So one difference between a biography and an autobiography, student, biography will be written by somebody else about some great personality, and autobiography is actually written by the person himself. Okay, with this we move on to another thing, right? What is the need to preserve sources? See, the mind map is about this, and the last point which comes in mind is what is the need to provide, what is the need to maintain all these sources, the archaeological source, the literary source. The reason, students, if we have these sources intact, then only we can understand our culture of the yesteryears. We can understand the history of the past. If we do not preserve these sources, how can we understand the history of our own culture, of our own country, or about other cultures and about other countries? So it's very important that these sources are preserved, because it helps us to understand the laws and social structures. It helps us to understand the various cultures. It helps us to be good global citizen and improves our critical and analytical thinking as well. Right? Then part of your revision, what would be the difference between the job of a historian and an archaeologist? You can say that the historians, they fall back on written sources. Archaeologists, they are more into the physical objects, like they are more into, you can say, digging up of physical objects like artifacts, buildings and other cultural remains of past civilization. And another point is, historians, they generally do not do field work, whereas the archaeologists, they make use of archaeological records to find clues while doing their field work. So archaeologists are more into field work, and historians are more into written work. They spend most of the time in libraries, whereas archaeologists, they spend most of the time in the field. Now with this we come to an end, students. One thing which I would like to mention over here, the question answer of this particular chapter which I had given earlier, many students have said that the answers were pretty long. So I'm changing it and I'm giving you short answers for all the questions. So students, please excuse for this time. You need to copy down the short answers which I am going to give you today in your note copy, in your history note copy, right? First and foremost, please draw this mind map on the first page, and after that you write the question answer, the ones which I am going to give you right now, right? Then after this, the fill in the blanks and match the following. These objective ones could be done in the textbook itself. Okay, thank you.